They told me the rules were simple. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. And whatever you do, don't look at him like he's human. They told me the money would change my life. Enough to pay for my little brother's surgery twice over, but nobody told me why the last 4 caretakers quit before sunrise. Nobody told me that my patient wasn't recovering from a car accident. He was Dominic Kessler, the man who owned half of Chicago's underworld and burned the other half to the ground. I took the job to save my brother. But to survive the first night, I had to do the one thing the contract explicitly forbade. I had to talk back. Chicago in November was a punishment. The wind came off Lake Michigan like it had a personal grudge, cutting through Hazel Brennan's second-hand coat as she stood outside the pharmacy on West Division Street. The pharmacist had just told her, with practiced sympathy, that her brother's prescription had been denied. Again, she stared at the text on her phone, the balance in her checking account. $41.16. Behind that, a voicemail from Mercy General. Miss Brennan, this is accounts receivable. Your brother's treatment has been suspended pending payment of the outstanding balance of $62,000. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Convenience. That was a word for people who had options. Hazel shoved the phone into her pocket and pressed her forehead against the cold brick wall of the pharmacy. She was 27 years old, a licensed trauma nurse with a spotless record from Cook County Hospital, and she was drowning. Her little brother, Miles, was 14 and had a tumor the size of a golf ball pressing against his optic nerve. Without the next round of treatment, he'd go blind. After that, it would spread. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Brennan. The voice was clipped, precise, with a faint Eastern European accent. My name is Roman Sava. You were referred by Dr. Ashworth for a private nursing position. A car will arrive at your location in 12 minutes. I suggest you be in it. The line went dead. Hazel stared at the phone. Ashworth was her former attending at Cook County, a brilliant surgeon who also happened to have a gambling problem and connections to people who operated outside the tax code. She'd mentioned her situation to him once, during a particularly desperate night shift. He'd given her a look and said, I might know someone who pays cash. She shouldn't get in the car. She knew that. Every true crime podcast she'd ever listened to was screaming at her to walk away. But then she thought about Miles, sitting in their cramped apartment in Pilsen, wearing sunglasses indoors because the light had started hurting his eyes. She thought about how he'd told her yesterday that it was okay, that he could learn Braille, that he didn't want her to worry. He was 14. He shouldn't have to be brave. When the black Escalade pulled up to the curb 12 minutes later, Hazel got in. The driver didn't speak. The SUV smelled like new leather and something chemical she couldn't identify. They drove north, then west, then further west, past the suburbs, past the last Starbucks, into the kind of Illinois countryside where the corn had been harvested and the fields were flat and dead under a pewter sky. After 90 minutes, they turned onto a private road lined with birch trees, stripped bare by the wind. The road ended at a gate, 12 feet of reinforced steel with cameras mounted on stone pillars. It swung open without the driver pressing anything. The house was a fortress disguised as architecture, 3 stories of dark stone and floor-to-ceiling glass, perched on a bluff overlooking a frozen creek. It looked like the kind of place that appeared in magazines about people who had too much money and not enough conscience. Inside, Hazel was led through a marble foyer to a study paneled in dark wood. A fire crackled in the hearth, but the room was still cold. Standing by the mantel was Roman Sava, early 50s, silver-haired, built like a retired middleweight who still hit the bag every morning. He wore a charcoal suit and an expression that suggested he had never smiled and saw no reason to start. Non-disclosure agreement. He slid a document across the desk. You sign, you work, you earn. You talk to anyone about what happens in this house, and we pursue remedies that are not covered by Illinois Civil Code. Hazel picked up the pen. Who's the patient? Mr. Kessler. The name landed like a brick thrown through a window. Hazel's hand stopped moving. Dominic Kessler. Even people who didn't follow Chicago's underworld knew that name. He ran the Kessler organization, a sprawling empire of ports, construction, and things that didn't appear on any balance sheet. The FBI had been trying to build a case against him for a decade. Witnesses had a habit of relocating to places that didn't have extradition treaties, or cemeteries. He sustained injuries 6 days ago, Roman continued as though discussing the weather. Multiple lacerations, 2 fractured ribs, internal bleeding that was surgically repaired. He is in the recovery phase. His temperament during this phase has been counterproductive. He threw a bedpan at the last nurse. The one before her lasted 4 hours. She said she'd rather work in a war zone. Hazel looked at the salary line on the contract, $15,000 a week. 3 weeks. She could pay for Miles's entire treatment and have enough left over to move them out of Pilsen. She signed. 3 rules, Miss Brennan. 1. Medication and wound care at 0700 and 1900. No deviation. 2. Do not engage in personal conversation. He is not interested in your life, and you should not be interested in his. 3. Do not enter his suite without verbal confirmation from the intercom. He has shot at intruders before, and his definition of intruder is broad. Has he shot at nurses? Not yet. Roman paused. But the night is young. He led her to the east wing and left her at a sealed door with a keypad. Your room is across the hall. His suite is through this door. He missed his evening medication. Correct it. Then Roman was gone, and Hazel was alone in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and expensive wood polish. She changed into her scrubs in the guest room. Navy blue, her lucky pair from Cook County. She checked her kit. Stethoscope, penlight, thermometer, gauze. She loaded the medication tray with the labeled prescriptions. Antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, a painkiller she noticed hadn't been touched in days. She pressed the intercom. Mr. Kessler, I'm Hazel, your new nurse. I'm coming in. Silence. She waited 5 seconds. Then she punched in the code Roman had given her and opened the door. The suite was enormous and wrecked. A side table had been overturned, its lamp shattered. A tray of food, untouched, sat congealing on the floor near the window. The curtains were drawn. The only light came from a single reading lamp on the far side of the room. He was in a leather chair by the window, shrouded in shadow. She could see the outline of wide shoulders, the glow of a glass of bourbon in his hand, and the white edge of bandages visible beneath an unbuttoned black shirt. He didn't look up. Get out. His voice was a low rasp like tires on gravel. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I need to administer your antibiotics, Hazel said, setting the tray on the dresser. And that bourbon is going to thin your blood and interact with the anti-inflammatories. The chair turned. She saw him fully for the first time, and something in her chest constricted involuntarily. Dominic Kessler was not what she expected. He was younger than she'd imagined, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair, disheveled. A jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood geometry on a molecular level. His eyes were green, not cold green, but fever green, bright and burning beneath heavy brows. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, not new but not old either. He was handsome the way a loaded weapon was beautiful, dangerous and not meant to be held. I didn't ask for your medical opinion, he said, taking a deliberate sip of the bourbon. I asked you to leave, and I will. After you take your meds, you're either very brave or very stupid. I'm very broke, Hazel said flatly, and you're very infected. She pointed at his side, where the bandages had turned a suspicious shade of yellow. That dressing hasn't been changed in at least 2 days. You're running a fever. I can see the sweat on your forehead from here, and if that wound goes septic, all the bourbon in Kentucky won't help you. Dominic stared at her. The silence stretched like a wire being pulled taut. 5 minutes, he said finally, setting the glass down with a sharp click. Touch me wrong, and you'll wish you hadn't. I've worked the ER on a Saturday night in Cook County. You're not my scariest patient. You're not even top 5. Something shifted in his expression, a micro-movement around the mouth that might have been amusement if it hadn't been buried under layers of hostility. He leaned back and gestured at his side with a grimace. Hazel knelt beside him and cut away the old dressing. The wound was ugly. A deep gash across his lower ribs, sutured but inflamed, the surrounding skin angry red and radiating heat. Whoever had sewn him up was competent but rushed. This needs to be irrigated and redressed properly, she murmured, laying out her supplies. And you need IV antibiotics, not the oral ones. These pills aren't cutting it. Just wrap it. No. He looked down at her. No, you heard me. Hazel met his gaze without flinching. I'm not putting a Band-Aid on a problem that needs real treatment. You hired a nurse, not a yes-woman. So either let me do my job, or fire me and find someone who'll let you die of sepsis with a clean conscience. The silence in the room was suffocating. She could hear the wind outside, the creak of the house settling. Dominic's jaw flexed, his hand twitched. For a terrible moment, Hazel thought she'd pushed too far. Then he exhaled through his nose, a sharp, angry sound, and held out his arm. Set up the IV. Hazel didn't celebrate. She worked. She cleaned the wound with saline, applied fresh dressing, and started an IV drip of vancomycin. He flinched once when she irrigated the deepest part of the gash, and his hand shot out and gripped the armrest hard enough to crack the leather. Breathe, she said quietly. Don't patronize me. It's medical advice, not patronizing. Holding your breath increases blood pressure and makes bleeding worse. Breathe. He breathed, through his teeth, but he breathed. When she finished, she checked his temperature. 102.4. I'll be back in 4 hours to check the line. Come back in the morning. I'll come back when the protocol requires, Hazel said, collecting the soiled dressings. She paused at the door. And I'm taking the bourbon. Like hell you are. Hazel walked to the side table, picked up the bottle of Blanton's, which probably cost more than her rent, and tucked it under her arm. You can have it back when your white blood cell count comes down. Until then, water. Lots of it. She walked out before he could respond. The door clicked shut behind her, and she leaned against the hallway wall. Her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the bottle of bourbon in her arms. She had just stolen whiskey from a man who reportedly dissolved problems in acid. From behind the closed door she heard a sound. Low, rough, disbelieving. He was laughing. "She took my Blantons!" Dominic Kessler muttered to no one. He stared at the closed door, flexing the hand that had nearly grabbed her. The pain in his side was duller now, tamped down by someone who actually knew what they were doing. He looked at the fresh white bandage. It was perfect, not a wrinkle. For the first time in 6 days, something other than rage flickered behind those fever-green eyes. Interest. By the third morning, Hazel had established a rhythm that ran on stubbornness and caffeine. Zo 700, medication, dressing change, argument about breakfast. 1200, check vitals, argument about rest. 1900, medication, dressing change, argument about everything else. Dominic fought her on every single point, but he fought her less each time. He ate the oatmeal she brought him on day 2 after a 10-minute standoff. He let her take his blood pressure on day 3 without threatening her. He even drank the electrolyte solution she mixed, though he told her it tasted like melted plastic. "It tastes like hydration," she'd shot back. "Your kidneys thank me. My kidneys can write you a card." The banter was becoming a problem. It was too easy. He was sharp and dark and unexpectedly funny when he forgot to be terrifying. On the third morning, while she changed his dressing, he asked about her brother without preamble. "Roman ran your background. Your brother has a cranial tumor. Grade 2 astrocytoma." Hazel's hands stilled on the gauze. "Is there anything about my life you don't know? Your favorite color? But I could find out. It's blue," she said, curtly, resuming her work. "And I don't like being researched. Then you shouldn't have walked into the home of a man who researches everyone." He watched her face. "The hospital suspended his treatment. I'm aware. I can make a phone call. His treatment resumes tomorrow." Hazel stood up, pulling off her gloves. "I didn't come here for charity. I came to work, earn my pay, and handle my own problems." "Stubborn," Dominic said, almost to himself. "You keep saying that because you keep proving it." His eyes tracked her as she moved around the room. "It's not an insult. Stubborn people survive. The flexible ones break." Something in his voice made her look at him, really look. Beneath the intimidation and the scars, she saw exhaustion, not physical. Something deeper. A man who had been the strongest person in every room for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to lean on anyone. "Eat your breakfast," Hazel said, pushing the tray toward him. "And if you throw the oatmeal again, I'm switching you to baby food." He ate it. All of it. That night, Hazel couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums. At 2:08 a.m., she got up for water. She was barefoot, wearing an old Northwestern t-shirt and sleep shorts, padding through the darkened hallway toward the kitchen. She heard voices from the security room. The door was slightly ajar. "The east perimeter sensors are on a 30-second loop. We've got a window." Hazel stopped. Her feet went cold against the stone floor. "Kessler's getting stronger. If we don't move now, we won't get another shot. What about the nurse?" "Collateral." "Flanagan wants it clean. No breathing witnesses." Flanagan. Paddy Flanagan ran the Flanagan crew on the south side. Mid-level thugs who'd been trying to muscle into Kessler territory for years. But hearing the name from inside Kessler's own house meant something much worse. There was a mole. Hazel backed away from the door, her pulse screaming in her ears. She needed to reach Dominic. She turned and moved quickly toward the east wing, but her keycard was on the nightstand in her room, and her room was past the security office. She reached Dominic's door and punched the intercom. Nothing. She punched it again. She could hear footsteps behind her now, someone coming from the security room. She hammered the door with her fist. "Dominic, wake up!" The footsteps were closer. She looked back. A figure stepped around the corner. Conrad Bleak, head of the night watch. He was tall, angular, and his hand was resting on the holstered pistol at his hip. "Miss Brennan, it's late. Can I help you? I need to check on Mr. Kessler. His fever might be spiking. I'm sure he's fine." Conrad walked toward her slowly. His hand unsnapped the holster. "Why don't you come with me?" Will, his gun was out now. A suppressor was threaded onto the barrel. "Conrad, please." Beep, click. The reinforced door behind her swung inward. A hand seized the back of her t-shirt and yanked her into darkness. She stumbled, hit the floor hard, looked up. Dominic stood in the doorway in grey sweatpants and nothing else. The bandage across his ribs was clean and white. In his right hand was a matte black Glock. His eyes were fully awake and fully lethal. Conrad froze mid-step. "Boss, she was wandering the halls. I was just..." 2 muffled shots. Conrad hit the ground before he finished his sentence. Dominic slammed a panel on the wall. The door sealed with a sound like a vault closing. He turned to Hazel, who was sitting on the floor, trembling so violently her vision was blurring. "How many?" he said. I don't. 2 voices. They said the sensors are looped. They said Flanagan wants it clean." Dominic's expression didn't change. He moved to a section of the wall, pressed his palm flat, and it slid open to reveal a gun safe and a bank of security monitors. Half the screens were static. "Roman," he said into a radio, "code black. Conrad was the leak. East perimeter is compromised. Get the team up now." He grabbed a Kevlar vest and threw it at Hazel. "Put this on. What about you? I don't wear armor. It slows me down. You have fractured ribs, and they have guns." "Put the vest on, Hazel." She pulled it over her head with shaking hands. He racked the slide of a shotgun and moved to the door. "Stay behind me. If I go down, you take this." He held up the Glock. "Point at the center of whatever's moving and squeeze. Don't think about it. I'm a nurse. I save people." "I don't. Tonight, you save yourself." The lights went out. The entire house plunged into absolute darkness. The only illumination was the faint blue glow of the dead security monitors and the intermittent flash of a motion sensor somewhere down the hall. "They cut the power," Dominic said calmly, like he was observing rain. "Stay close." They moved through the hallway, Dominic leading with the shotgun, one hand keeping Hazel pressed against his back. He moved silently despite his injuries, though she could hear the slight catch in his breathing, the fractured ribs protesting every step. They reached the main landing. Below, flashlight beams swept the foyer. Men's voices echoed off marble. "Find Kessler. Shoot on sight." Dominic stepped to the railing. Lightning from the storm outside lit him in a flash of white, bandaged, barefoot, and holding a shotgun like he'd been born with it. "You picked the wrong house," he said, and fired. The next 5 minutes were a blur of noise and chaos. Gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed into the stone railing near Hazel's head. She screamed and dropped flat. Dominic grabbed her arm and hauled her down a side corridor, and firing behind them. The shotgun's boom deafening in the enclosed space. He was slowing. She could see blood darkening the waistband of his sweatpants. "You're bleeding," she hissed. "Later." They burst through a service door into the kitchen. Industrial steel, cold tile, moonlight through a skylight. Dominic shoved a prep island in front of the door and leaned against the counter, breathing hard. The blood on his side was spreading. "Dominic." Hazel grabbed a clean dish towel and pressed it against his wound. "Freight elevator," he gritted out. "Code is 2347. Takes you to the garage. Go. I'm not leaving you." "That wasn't a suggestion. And I'm not one of your soldiers. You don't get to order me to let you die." He looked at her then. Really looked. Through the pain and the adrenaline, something raw crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or something close to wonder. Like no one had argued with him about his own survival before. The kitchen door exploded inward. 2 men in tactical gear rushed through, rifles raised. Hazel didn't think. She grabbed the biggest thing within reach, a cast-iron Dutch oven sitting on the stove, and swung it with everything she had. It connected with the first man's shoulder, knocking his rifle sideways. He staggered, 2 gunshots from the floor. Dominic, sitting in a pool of his own blood, put both men down with mechanical precision. The silence that followed rang like a bell. Hazel stood there, chest heaving, clutching the Dutch oven like a shield. She looked at the bodies. She looked at Dominic. "A Dutch oven," he wheezed. A bloody, incredulous grin split his face. "You hit a mercenary with a Dutch oven. It was heavy." She choked out, tea and adrenaline and something hysterical bubbling up. "It was the heaviest thing I could find. Remind me never to cook with you." The freight elevator opened. Roman and 5 armed men poured out. "Boss." Roman swept the room. He looked at the dented Dutch oven in Hazel's hands, then at the unconscious mercenary with the dislocated shoulder. His eyebrow rose approximately 1 millimeter, which for Roman was the equivalent of total shock. "Don't ask," Dominic murmured and passed out. Hazel caught him before he hit the tile. "Get him downstairs now. He's hemorrhaging." The basement infirmary was surgical grade. Hazel worked for an hour straight, barking orders at men who killed people for a living, like they were first-year residents. She found the source of the bleed, a partially torn intercostal artery aggravated by the fight. She clamped it, sutured it, stabilized his pressure. When she finally peeled off her gloves, her scrubs were soaked through with his blood. "He'll make it," she told Roman. Roman nodded. Then he handed her a phone. This was Conrad's. We cracked it. An unknown number instructing Conrad on the breach plan. And then, near the bottom, "Unknown," the brother talked. "Gave us her location in exchange for his hospital bills. Use her to get inside." Hazel read it twice, 3 times. Miles. Her 14-year-old brother. Her sweet, scared, half-blind little brother had told Flanagan's people where she was, in exchange for his treatment. "He's a child," Roman said quietly. "They pressured him, told him they'd make sure he got his surgery if he cooperated." "He's 14, Hazel whispered. He doesn't even understand what he did, but it still felt like a knife between her ribs. She left the infirmary. She walked upstairs, found the living room, and sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She pulled her knees to her chest and cried, silently. The way you learn to cry when you grow up in a house where crying made things worse. She didn't hear the IV pole rattling until it was right next to her. Dominic lowered himself to the floor beside her, moving like every joint in his body was filed with ground glass. He was pale as paper, shirtless, the fresh bandages stark against his skin. You should be in bed, she said, wiping her face. So should you. He didn't say anything else. He just sat there, his shoulder touching hers, solid and warm and alive because of her. Roman told me, he said after a while. He's a kid, Dominic. He didn't know. I know they used him. He's scared and he's sick. And someone told him they'd fix everything if he just answered a few questions. Her voice cracked. He's all I have. He's not all you have, Dominic said. Not anymore. She looked at him. His green eyes were dark, intent. He reached over and took her hand. His grip was weak from blood loss, but his fingers threaded through hers like they'd practiced. Your brother is going to get his surgery, Dominic said. That is not negotiable. And Flanagan is going to learn what happens when you use children as leverage against people under my protection. Your protection? He ran his thumb over her knuckles. You saved my life, twice. Where I come from, that means something. I hit a man with a Dutch oven. That's not heroism. That's panic. It's loyalty, he said. And loyalty is the only currency I respect. 2 days later, Dominic Kessler stood in front of a mirror, buttoning a suit jacket over his bandages with stiff, careful movements. Hazel stood behind him in a charcoal wrap dress Roman had produced from somewhere, looking like a different person from the broke nurse who'd arrived in scrubs 4 days ago. You're going to pop those stitches, she said. Only if I move too fast. You always move too fast. He turned. The look he gave her was heated enough to ignite paper. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a simple band of white gold with a single emerald. What is that? Flanagan understands 2 things, force and alliances. If you walk in there as my nurse, he sees a hostage. If you walk in there wearing this, he sees a partner. That's a lot to ask of a ring. It's a lot to ask of you. He paused. It's temporary. Is it? He didn't answer. He slid it onto her finger. The motorcade drove to a meat-packing plant in back of the yards. The air smelled of old blood and industrial cleaner. Inside, Paddy Flanagan waited with 6 of his men and the confidence of a man who didn't know he was already finished. Miles was there too, sitting in a folding chair near the wall, small and hunched, wearing the oversized hoodie Hazel had bought him last Christmas. When he saw her, his face crumpled. Hazel, I'm sorry. They said they'd help me. They said, I know, buddy. She crouched in front of him, cupping his face. I know. She stood and turned to Flanagan. He was red-faced, stocky, wearing a gold chain over a tracksuit like it was 1987. Kessler, Flanagan said, grinning. Looking rough. Heard you had a bad week. Worse for you, Paddy. Dominic's voice was ice. You sent amateurs into my home. You used a child to do your intelligence work, and you thought I'd die quietly. Business is business. Then let's do business. Dominic raised his hand. Roman and 8 men raised rifles simultaneously. The metallic symphony of safeties clicking off filled the room. Flanagan's grin evaporated. Now hold on, the Brennan debt is erased, Dominic said. Boy gets his surgery at Northwestern Memorial, on your dime as reparations. And you pull your operations back south of 63rd Street. Permanently. That's my territory. It was your territory. You voided the arrangement when you came into my home. Dominic took a step closer. Despite the bandages, despite the pain that Hazel knew was raging through his torso, he moved like gravity had increased around him. This is your one chance to walk out of this building, Paddy. I suggest you take it before my patience and my stitches both give out. Flanagan looked at the rifles. He looked at Roman's expressionless face. He looked at Dominic Kessler, who was smiling the way a predator smiles right before the strike. Fine, Flanagan spat. Fine, take it, take all of it. Pleasure doing business. Outside, the November air bit through the thin dress, but Hazel barely felt it. Miles was beside her, clutching her hand, and for the first time in months, the pressure in her chest had loosened. Roman loaded Miles into one of the SUVs. I'll take him to Northwestern myself, he said. To Miles. There's hot chocolate in the console. Touch anything else and we'll have a conversation. Miles nodded rapidly. Hazel watched the SUV pull away, then turned to find Dominic leaning against the car, one hand pressed against his ribs. His face was grey. Let me see, she said, reaching for his side. He caught her hand instead, held it against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, strong, stubbornly alive. The debt is cleared, he said. Your brother's treatment starts tomorrow. You can walk away. Hazel looked at the ring on her finger. She thought about her apartment, the double shifts, the constant drowning. Then she looked at Dominic Kessler. a man the entire city feared, who had thrown his body between her and bullets, who sat on a cold floor beside her while she cried, who fought her about oatmeal every single morning, like it was the hill he wanted to die on. "I'm not walking anywhere," she said. She stepped closer, lacing her fingers through his, "and this ring is staying on." Dominic looked at her. Something in those green eyes shifted, a wall coming down so quietly you could almost miss it. "You break every rule I make," he murmured. "Only the stupid ones." He pulled her in, one arm around her waist, careful of his stitches but not careful enough. He kissed her right there in the parking lot of a meatpacking plant in back of the yards, surrounded by armed men and the fading smell of smoke, and Hazel Brennan kissed him back like her life depended on it. Because maybe it did. And maybe that was finally okay. She had walked into the lion's den as a desperate nurse with $41 in her bank account. She was walking out as the woman who tamed Chicago's most dangerous man with saline, stubbornness, and a Dutch oven. And if that isn't proof that loyalty beats bloodlines every single time, nothing is. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment and tell me, did Hazel make the right call staying? And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story from Lovelord. Thanks for watching.